The armory at FOB Sanitic smelled like gun oil and Syrian dust. It always did. Corporal Maya Chen stood at the counter with her rifle case open, waiting for the weapons check to clear so she could sign out for range day. The M4 inside wasn't standard issue anymore. She'd rebuilt it herself over 2 deployments, match-grade barrel and all. But it was the finish that caught attention. Pink. Cerakote pink, professionally done, every inch of it. Behind her, 3 Marines from 2nd Battalion were gearing up for patrol. The moment one of them spotted the rifle, the jokes started. Yo, did Bobby join the Corps? Laughter. Loud, confident, the kind that fills a room. Another voice chimed in. That thing even fire real rounds. Or does it just shoot glitter? More laughter. Chen didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the log sheet, pen in hand, her face neutral. The armor behind the counter, Gunnery Sergeant Valdez, a man who'd seen 3 wars and probably twice as much bullshit, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He'd learned a long time ago when to stay out of it. Guess the PX started selling toy guns now. This from Corporal Vance, the loudest of the 3. He was already pulling out his phone, angling for a shot of the pink rifle like it was some kind of zoo exhibit. Got to document this. The boys back home are never gonna believe it. The camera clicked. Chen's jaw tightened just slightly, a barely visible flex of muscle along her jawline. But she didn't say a word. She finished signing her name, neat, controlled letters, shouldered her gear, and closed the rifle case with a metallic snap that cut through the noise. Then she walked out into the heat. The Syrian sun hit like a hammer the second she stepped outside, but Chen didn't slow down. Behind her, through the open door, she could still hear them. $20 says she doesn't even qualify. Dude, I'll take that bet. She probably can't hit the BAM. More laughter, echoing off the plywood and sandbags. Inside the armory, Gunny Valdez watched her go. He glanced at the 3 Marines, still laughing, still loud, still so sure of themselves. Then he looked back toward the door where Chen had disappeared into the glare. He muttered something under his breath. Too quiet for anyone to hear. But if they'd been paying attention, they might have noticed he wasn't smiling. Chen's quarters were a plywood box she shared with 2 other women, an Army medic named Torres and an Air Force intel analyst who kept to herself. The B-hut was basic, 3 cots, 3 wool lockers, a struggling air conditioner that rattled more than it cooled. But it was quiet, and right now, that was all Chen needed. She sat cross-legged on her cot with the pink rifle disassembled across a cleaning mat. Her hands moved with the kind of precision that only comes from repetition, thousands of hours of it. Bolt carrier group, upper receiver, barrel extension, every component checked, cleaned, reassembled. The rifle wasn't just pink. It was built on a match-grade upper with a proof research barrel, a Geisel trigger, and a scope that cost more than most Marines made in a month. Serious equipment under a non-serious finish. On the plywood wall above her cot, barely visible unless you were looking for it, hung a small framed photo. A younger Chen, maybe 20 years old, standing on a range at Camp Pendleton. She was holding a trophy, grinning in a way she hadn't in years. Next to it, faded and sun-bleached, was a unit patch from Iraq, 2014 to 2015, a deployment most people in her current unit didn't even know about. Chen had grown up in rural Montana, where her father taught her to shoot before she taught her to drive. He'd been a competitive marksman himself, local legend at the range, the kind of man who could call his shots before the trigger broke. By the time Chen was 16, she could outshoot half the men at the club. By 18, she'd won state twice. She joined the Marines at 19 with dreams of reconnaissance, of scout sniper school, of putting her skills to use. Instead, she got administration paperwork and personnel rosters. But she didn't quit. Every off-duty hour, she was at the range. Every weekend, she was running drills. And in Iraq, when a small Recon unit got attached to her FOB and saw her shoot, they pulled strings, gave her Overwatch duties, let her do what she was built for. She made shots in Iraq that saved convoys, silenced threats before they became body counts. For 8 months, she'd been exactly what she'd trained to be. Then the deployment ended. Rotation orders came through, and Chen found herself back in a logistics slot, her sniper potential buried under supply requisitions and inventory spreadsheets. The Marine Corps had a way of forgetting what you could do if it wasn't written in your MOS code. The pink rifle had been her father's idea. He'd saved for months to have it custom-coated, said it didn't matter what color it was as long as it shot true. He presented it to her a year ago, grinning that same grin from the photo on her wall. 6 months later, cancer took him. Fast and brutal, the way it always seemed to go. Now Chen was in Syria, temporarily attached to a forward combat element because they were short on bodies. But all her new unit saw was the surface, female, support MOS, pink gun. They didn't see the Iraq patch, didn't see the hours, didn't see the shots that had already mattered when it counted. They saw a joke. Chen finished reassembling the rifle, chambered a dummy round to check the action, then safed it and set it aside. Outside, she could hear voices, Marines heading to Chow, laughing about something. Maybe still laughing about her. She didn't care. The rifle would speak for itself when it needed to. Escalation, range day humiliation. The range was a kilometer outside the wire. Nothing fancy, just berms and target frames baking under the Syrian sun. Chen arrived with her gear at 0800, along with a dozen other Marines scheduled for quarterly rifle qualification. Vance and 2 others from his unit were already there, joking with a range safety officer, a weathered staff sergeant named Kowalski who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. When Chen stepped up to sign in, Vance spotted the pink rifle case and grinned. "Staff Sergeant, you might want to stand closer to this one," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She might need help finding the target." Snickers rippled through the group. Kowalski glanced at Chen, then at Vance, his expression flat. "She'll shoot when it's her turn, Corporal, just like everyone else." Chen said nothing. She set her case down, opened it, and began her pre-firing routine. The other Marines cycled through their strings, some shooting well, some barely qualifying. Vance shot marksman, decent but nothing special, and made a show of high-fiving his buddies when he cleared the line. Then it was Chen's turn. She stepped to the firing line with the pink rifle, her movements economical and practiced. The wind was gusting from the west, maybe 5 miles per hour. She adjusted her stance without thinking about it, feet shoulder-width apart, weight slightly forward. Her breathing slowed. 4 counts in, hold, 6 counts out. The rifle came up smooth, her cheek finding the stock like it had 1,000 times before. Her finger rested outside the trigger guard, textbook discipline, waiting for the command. "Shooter ready," Kowalski called. 3 rounds, standing. "On your own time." Chen's finger moved to the trigger. 3 control breaks, each one a surprise even to her. The pink rifle barked 3 times, the sound sharp and clean in the desert air. Kowalski raised his binoculars, glassed the target downrange. His eyebrows went up slightly. He didn't say anything, but something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. The rest of Chen's string went the same way. Kneeling, prone, rapid fire. Every round sent a mass. Tight groupings that would score Expo Plus if anyone bothered to count them properly. When she finished and saved her weapon, Kowalski marked her scorecard without comment. But the way he looked at her had changed. Vance and his buddies barely noticed. They were already packing up, already moving on to the next joke, the next target. That evening in the mess hall, the rumors started in earnest. Chen was sitting 3 tables away with Torres the medic and the Air Force analyst, eating reconstituted chicken that tasted like cardboard. Across the room, Vance was holding court with 6 Marines from his platoon. "I'm just saying," one of them said, loud enough to carry, "that rifle's got to be for Instagram or some shit. You don't bring a pink gun to a deployment unless you're trying to get likes." "She's probably only here because of diversity quotas," another chimed in. "I heard she didn't even leave the wire in Iraq. Just sat in an office the whole time." Lies. All of it. But no one challenged them. Torres glanced at Chen, noticing the way her knuckles had gone white around her fork. "You good?" "Fine," Chen said quietly. Her hands were steady, but the grip on her utensil was just a little too tight. She didn't look up, didn't react, just kept eating, chewing mechanically, while the lies spread like wildfire through the FOB. By the time she left the mess hall, Half the base probably believed she was some kind of publicity stunt. The mission brief came the next morning in a plywood operations center that smelled like stale coffee and stress. Lieutenant Garrett, fresh from Quantico and still figuring out how to run a platoon, stood at a map of the contested village they'd be patrolling. Kurdish Peshmerga forces were leading the op, clearing a neighborhood on the edge of former ISIS territory. The Marines were providing overwatch and quick reaction support. "Chen, you'll take overwatch position Alpha," Garrett said, tapping a rooftop on the map. 300 meters out, good sight lines on the main avenue. Vance spoke up before Chen could acknowledge the order. "So, no disrespect, but shouldn't we put someone with actual combat experience up there?" The room went quiet. Garrett hesitated, his jaw working. He was new to the unit, still navigating personalities, still trying not to make waves. Chen could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Easier to reassign her than deal with pushback from a senior corporal with more time in country. "Right," Garrett said finally. "Chen, you'll stay with the logistics convoy. Rear security." Chen didn't protest. She just nodded once, her face neutral. But if anyone had been watching closely, they would have seen it, just for a second. A flicker in her eyes. Not anger, not hurt. Something colder. Resolve. The brief wrapped up 5 minutes later. Vance clapped another Marine on the back, laughing about something unrelated, already confident that tomorrow's mission would go smooth. Around him, the others geared up, joking, loud, certain of themselves. Chen walked out into the Syrian sun alone. No one noticed the way she instinctively scanned the roof lines as she crossed the compound. No one noticed how her rifle muzzle never once swept across another person, even casually. No one noticed the small, distinctive calluses on her right index finger, the kind that only come from thousands of trigger breaks. They saw what they wanted to see. The village was called Al-Shaddadi, or what was left of it. Half-collapsed buildings, streets choked with rubble, the skeletal remains of a place that had seen too much war. The joint patrol moved through it slowly, Kurdish Peshmerga fighters on point, Marines providing security, everyone scanning windows and roof lines for threats that might not be there anymore. Chen was a half-kilometer back with the logistics convoy, sitting in the bed of a supply truck alongside a squad of Army National Guard soldiers who looked young enough to be in high school. They were parked on a low ridge overlooking the valley. The village spread out below them like a broken model. Rear security. The safe position. The one that didn't matter. She kept her rifle across her lap anyway, scanning the terrain through her optic out of habit. Old instincts died hard. Up ahead, Vance and the Overwatch team were set up in a 3-story building with good sight lines on the main route. Chen could see them through her scope if she looked. Shadows moving behind shattered windows, confident and positioned exactly where the mission brief had put them. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. The patrol moved through empty streets, clearing buildings that had already been cleared a dozen times before. The radio chatter was routine. Bored, even. Then the world exploded. The first burst of machine gun fire sounded like a buzzsaw tearing through sheet metal. A PKM, Chen knew instantly. 7.62 millimeters, belt-fed, the kind of weapon that could shred a squad in seconds. The patrol scattered, Kurdish fighters diving behind rubble, Marines scrambling for cover. The radio erupted in controlled chaos. "Contact! Contact east, 2nd floor window. We're pinned down. Can't move." Chen's optic snapped toward the source of the fire. 800 meters out, maybe more, a building on the far edge of the village. 2nd floor, east-facing window, partially obscured by collapsed wall. The PKM was chattering in controlled bursts, keeping the patrol locked in place. The Overwatch team engaged immediately. Chen could hear the crack of M4 fire from Vance's position, but the angle was wrong. The machine gun nest was tucked behind cover, only exposing itself for seconds at a time when the shooter shifted to fire. From where the Overwatch team was positioned, they'd have to lean out into the machine gun's field of fire just to get a shot. "Can't get eyes on him." Vance's voice, frustrated and tight. "We're blocked by rubble." "Is behind cover, 2nd floor, east window," someone else shouted. Lieutenant Garrett's voice cut through, trying to stay calm. "Air support. Where's my air support?" "Negative. Actual." IOE is tight. Too many civilians in the area. We need positive hostile ID before we can clear for strike. Minutes crawled by. The PKM kept firing, methodical and patient, pinning the patrol in place. One of the Kurdish fighters was down, bleeding in the middle of the street, his teammates unable to reach him without crossing the machine gun's line of fire. Vance tried another shot. Chen watched through her scope as he leaned out, fired, and pulled back. The round sparked off concrete somewhere below the window. Wrong angle. Wrong position. We need a better position, someone yelled. That's when Gunnery Sergeant Valdez, standing beside the convoy truck with his radio, turned and looked at Chen. He didn't say anything at first, just studied her for a long moment, his eyes moving from her face to the pink rifle in her lap, then to the village spread out below them. He'd heard the radio traffic. He'd done the math. "You got a shot from here?" he asked quietly. Chen was already glassing the target building, her optic dialed to maximum magnification. She could see the window, the partial cover, the narrow window of opportunity every time the shooter shifted position to fire. The angle from the convoy was different, elevated, offset, a clean line of sight that the Overwatch team didn't have. She nodded once. "Yes, Gunny." Valdez didn't hesitate. He keyed his radio. "Actual, this is Convoy 6. I have an asset with line of sight on the target. Request permission for precision fire." A pause. Static. Then Lieutenant Garrett's voice, desperate and out of options. "Convoy 6, you're cleared hot. Take the shot." Another voice crackled over the net, disbelief bleeding through the static. "Vance. Wait, who's shooting?" Valdez ignored him. Chen was already moving. She climbed out of the truck bed and moved to the tailgate, setting her rifle down carefully on the metal surface. One of the army guardsmen handed her his rucksack without being asked. Good instincts. That kid, and she positioned it under the rifle's forend as a stable rest. Around her, the logistics marines and guardsmen watched in confused silence, not sure what they were seeing but smart enough to stay quiet. Chen settled into position, her body going still. Prone, elbows anchored, breathing slowed. She ranged the target through her scope. 847 meters. The wind was gusting from the west, maybe 8 to 10 miles per hour, kicking up dust devils in the street below. The machine gunner was partially obscured behind a collapsed section of wall, visible only when he leaned out to fire. 2-second windows, maybe 3 if she was lucky. This wasn't a shot most Marines would attempt. Hell, this wasn't a shot most designated marksmen would be confident taking. The distance, the wind, the moving target, the narrow window of opportunity, it required more than training. It required something deeper. Instinct. Experience. The kind of cold confidence that only came from having made impossible shots before and knowing, without doubt, that you could do it again. Chen's finger rested on the trigger guard. Her breathing slowed further. 4 counts in. Hold. 6 counts out. The battlefield held its breath. And Chen waited for her window. The world narrowed. Chen's breathing slowed to a rhythm she'd learned years ago, back when her father first taught her what it meant to make a shot that mattered. 4 counts in. Hold. 6 counts out. Her heartbeat steadied, each pulse distinct and measured. Through her scope, the reticle hovered on the second-floor window, waiting. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. The machine gun barked again, pinning the patrol down. The shooter was disciplined, firing in controlled bursts, never exposing himself for more than a moment. But Chen knew how machine guns worked. Sooner or later, he'd have to reload. And when he did, he'd lean out just a fraction more, just long enough. She waited. Around her, the world had gone silent. The army guardsmen weren't breathing. Gunny Valdez stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the distant building. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then it happened. The PKM went quiet for a reload. The shooter shifted, leaning out to pull the belt feed, his body visible for the first time. 3 seconds, maybe less. Chen exhaled halfway, her lungs emptying in a controlled release. Her finger found the trigger's breakpoint, that fine edge between tension and release. She didn't pull. She squeezed. A steady, inevitable pressure that felt like breathing. The pink rifle cracked once. A single, sharp report that echoed across the desert and rolled through the valley like thunder. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The world hung suspended. Then, 847 meters away, the machine gun went silent. The shooter slumped forward, visible for just a moment in the window before gravity pulled him back into the darkness. The PKM clattered to the floor, its barrel pointing uselessly at the sky. The radio exploded. Cease fire. Cease fire. Threat neutralized. Patrol, move now. Get to that fighter. The Kurdish Peshmerga surged forward, dragging their wounded comrade to cover while Marines provided suppressing fire on buildings that no longer held threats. The street that had been a kill zone seconds ago was suddenly safe. A new voice came over the radio, accented but clear. The Kurdish commander. Who made that shot? Gunny Valdez keyed his handset, his voice steady. Corporal Chen, Marines. Silence on the net. Not the panicked silence of combat, but the stunned silence of people trying to process what they'd just heard. Then Lieutenant Garrett's voice, shaky with adrenaline and something else. Disbelief, maybe, or respect. Outstanding shot, Corporal. That was, Jesus, that was 800+ meters. At the overwatch position, Vance and his team stood frozen, staring at their radios like the devices had malfunctioned. Like the words coming through couldn't possibly be real. Back at the convoy, Chen saved her rifle with mechanical precision. She stood, brushed the dust off her trousers, and slung the pink rifle across her chest. The army guardsmen were staring at her like she'd just walked on water. One of them, a kid who couldn't have been more than 20, finally found his voice. Holy shit, Corporal. Chen didn't celebrate, didn't smile, didn't say a word. She just checked her rifle one more time, confirmed the magazine was seated, and sat down on the tailgate to wait for exfil. 20 minutes later, when the patrol rolled back through the FOB gates, Gunny Valdez found her near the armory, already breaking down her rifle for cleaning. Corporal, he said quietly. Got a minute? Chen looked up, nodded. Gunny stepped closer, his eyes moving to her plate carrier. During the shot, when she'd been prone on the tailgate, her gear had shifted slightly. Now he could see what had been hidden before, a small, worn patch attached to her carrier, barely visible under the layers of pouches and equipment. A Marine Scout sniper insignia, faded from sun and use, the kind of patch you only wore if you'd earned it the hard way. Gunny's eyes narrowed. You called HOG. Hug, Hunter of Gunmen, the informal title given to Marines who graduated Scout Sniper School. Chen nodded once. Iraq, 2015, Gunny. Attached duty with a wrecking unit. Never made it official MOS. They needed bodies for admin after the deployment ended. Gunny was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he shook his head, something between frustration and respect crossing his face. That was a hell of a shot, Marine. He glanced at the pink rifle in her hands. Why the pink rifle? Chen's answer came quiet, but steady. My dad built it for me. Custom Cerakote, match barrel, the whole setup. He died 6 months ago. Cancer. She looked down at the rifle, her fingers tracing the edge of the receiver. Figured if I'm going to carry something that reminds me of him every day, I don't care what color it is. Gunny nodded slowly. He didn't offer condolences. He was too old core for that. But his voice carried weight when he spoke. Fair enough, Corporal. Fair enough. By that evening, word had spread through FOB Sanadik like wildfire. Not rumors this time. Facts. Confirmed by radio traffic, by the Kurdish commander, by the lieutenant himself. The female Marine with the pink rifle had made an 847-meter shot under combat conditions. One shot, one kill, saved the patrol, saved the wounded Peshmerga fighter bleeding in the street. No one could deny it. No one could minimize it. No one could laugh it away. When Chen walked into the chow hall that night, the room didn't go silent. This wasn't a movie. But the energy shifted. Marines who'd been laughing 2 days ago now glanced at her with something different in their eyes. Acknowledgement. Respect. Vance was sitting with his usual crew near the back. When Chen walked past, carrying her tray, he looked up. For a moment, their eyes met. He didn't apologize. He didn't say a word. But he nodded, Curt, uncomfortable, unmistakably respectful. Chen nodded back and kept walking. Later that night, back in the bee hut, Chen sat on her cot with the pink rifle disassembled across her cleaning mat again. Torres the medic sat across from her, watching quietly. Finally, Torres asked the question that had been building all day. Why didn't you say anything? Her voice was soft, not accusing, just curious. Why'd you let them talk all that shit? Chen didn't look up from the rifle. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, running a bore snake through the barrel, checking for carbon buildup. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. Matter of fact, because I didn't need to prove anything until it mattered. She set the barrel down, looked up at Torres. When it mattered, the rifle spoke for me. Torres studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, she said quietly. Yeah, I guess it did. Chen went back to cleaning. Outside, the FOB hummed with its usual noise, generators, voices, the distant sound of helicopters. But inside the bee hut, it was quiet. The pink rifle gleamed under the flickering light, every component clean and ready. Just like always. The changes came quietly, the way real change usually does. 2 days after the shot, Lieutenant Garrett reassigned Chen to overwatch duties for the remainder of the deployment. Not as a favor, not as an apology, but because when you have someone who can make an 847-meter shot under combat conditions, you don't waste them on rear security. The reassignment came through official channels, typed on a personnel roster, like it had always been the plan. No one questioned it. Chen took up position on rooftops and ridgelines for the next 6 weeks, providing overwatch for patrols that moved through villages still clearing out the last remnants of ISIS resistance. The LT requested her by name for precision shooting tasks. When the Kurdish forces needed someone to cover their advance through a contested neighborhood, they asked for the Marine with the pink rifle. Vance's group didn't become her best friends. This wasn't a fairy tale. But the jokes stopped. The whispers stopped. When they passed each other in the corridors between the plywood bee huts, there were nods instead of smirks. Acknowledgement instead of dismissal. When new Marines rotated into FOB Sanadik and asked about that pink rifle, they were told the story. Not as mockery, not as a punchline, but with the kind of respect reserved for people who'd proven themselves when it counted. Chen was still quiet. She still ate with Torres and the Air Force analysts more often than with the infantry Marines. She still kept to herself, still maintained that careful distance between her and everyone else. But now it was a choice, not exclusion. Now, when she sat alone, it was because she wanted to, not because no one would sit with her. The pink rifle became something else in the unit's eyes. Not a joke, not a gimmick, a legend. A reminder that competence doesn't announce itself with volume and bravado. It just shows up, does the work, and lets the results speak. In a military culture that often values loudness, the bold voices in briefing rooms, the confident swagger of combat veterans, the stories told and retold until they take on lives of their own, it's easy to overlook the quiet professionals. The ones who don't need to tell you their resume. The ones who don't need your approval or your validation. They're the ones who show up every day, maintain their equipment to a standard most people will never see, and wait patiently for the moment when everything they've trained for actually matters. Chen never asked for recognition. She never demanded respect. She carried her father's memory in pink Cerakote and rifle oil, in match-grade barrels and hand-loaded fundamentals. She honored him not by talking about what she could do, but by doing it when lives hung in the balance. One shot, one kill, one patrol that made it home. That was enough. 6 weeks later, as the Syrian sun dipped toward the horizon and painted the desert in shades of orange and purple, Chen sat on overwatch at the eastern edge of the FOB. Her pink rifle rested across her knees, silhouetted against the fading light. Below, the FOB hummed with life. Marines running PT, mechanics working on vehicles, the eternal rhythm of a forward operating base that never truly sleeps. She glassed the perimeter one more time through her optic, scanning the ridgelines and the broken buildings beyond the wire. All clear, the way it had been for hours, the way it would probably stay. But she watched anyway, because that's what quiet professionals do. They keep watch. They stay ready. They don't assume the world is safe just because it's being quiet. Somewhere below, new Marines were arriving, loud and confident, telling stories about themselves that no one had asked to hear. Somewhere, veterans were laughing, training, living the strange half-life of deployment where boredom and danger exist in the same breath. And above it all, Corporal Maya Chen kept watch with a pink rifle and a memory that wouldn't fade. They'd joked about the pink rifle, but they'd never forget the shot. And in the end, that's the only thing that mattered. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been the quiet one in the room while louder voices took up all the space, drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from, especially if you've served. Because if there's one thing veterans know, it's this. The loudest voices are rarely the most dangerous ones. The real professionals don't need to tell you who they are. They just show up when it counts.